In 2000, a love triangle featured on The Jerry Springer Show resulted in a real-life murder just hours after the episode aired. This segment, titled Secret Mistresses Confronted, brought together 42-year-old Ralph Panitz, his new wife Eleanor, and his ex-wife Nancy Panitz in a televised spectacle of screaming and public humiliation. On the night the episode aired, weeks after it was taped, Ralph reportedly watched it while drinking at a bar in Sarasota, growing increasingly enraged as his private shame played out on national television. Apparently fueled by humiliation and fury, he drove to his ex-wife Nancy's home, where she had been granted temporary possession during their divorce, and launched into a violent assault. He beat her so viciously that she was found naked, bloodied, and lifeless on the floor, her body showing signs of a prolonged and violent beating. Ralph was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2002. The case remains a haunting example of how reality TV's thirst for drama can spill into real-life horror. In July of 2023, Australian woman Erin Patterson invited her ex-in-laws and their relatives over for lunch, serving them a homemade beef Wellington laced with one of the deadliest fungi on Earth, death cap mushrooms. Within a few days, 3 of them were dead from agonizing organ failure, and a 4th barely survived after a liver transplant. Patterson claimed it was a tragic accident, but investigators found damning evidence, including a food dehydrator tied to the poison and inconsistent stories about where the mushrooms came from. She was recently convicted of 3 counts of murder and likely faces life in prison. In the mid-1800s, women across the Western world wore massive crinolines, hoop skirts that ballooned outward in all directions, often made from highly flammable fabrics like cotton. The size made them elegant but deadly. They caught fire easily near candles or fireplaces, and the sheer width made them nearly impossible to escape the flames. Within just 2 months in 1863, 19 English women burnt to death after their dresses caught fire. By the end of the decade, more than 3,000 people had died as a result of crinoline fires. In 2005, Thomas Montgomery, a 46-year-old married man from New York, created an online persona named Tommy, presenting himself as an 18-year-old Marine. Using this catfish, he began an online relationship with a 17-year-old girl from West Virginia named Jessie. But Montgomery's coworker, 22-year-old Brian Barrett, also became involved with Jessie online. When Jessie started shifting her attention to Barrett without him having to catfish her, Montgomery became consumed with jealousy. Eventually, Montgomery ambushed Barrett in their workplace parking lot and shot him 3 times with a military-style rifle, with 1 bullet piercing his neck as he sat in his car. Tommy was later arrested and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving 20 years in prison. But the story didn't stop there. In a final shocking twist, it was revealed that the teen girl they'd both been obsessed with was actually a 45-year-old housewife who was using her daughter's photos to catfish men online. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. On July 17, 2025, Felix Baumgartner, the daredevil who once broke the sound barrier by jumping from the edge of space, was killed in a tragic paragliding crash in Italy at the age of 56. While piloting a motorized paraglider near a seaside resort, he reportedly may have suffered a cardiac event mid-air, causing the craft to spiral out of control before slamming into the hotel's pool area. The impact killed him instantly and injured a hotel worker with flying debris, sending her to the hospital with neck trauma, but she appears to be okay. Witnesses described a terrifying boom as the glider hit, followed by screams from stunned vacationers. Paramedics arrived quickly but were unable to revive him, and guests at the hotel were left stunned as rescue workers covered his body with a tarp near the wreckage. Hours before the fatal crash, he posted an Instagram story with the caption, "Too much wind," his eerie final message before the legendary thrill-seeker met a brutal end while doing what he loved. Christina Formella, a 30-year-old special ed teacher and soccer coach at a high school in Illinois, is facing 55 felony charges tied to alleged misconduct with a student that reportedly began when he was just 14 years old. Authorities claim the inappropriate relationship lasted nearly 2 years and involved over 50 encounters, many occurring on school grounds during class hours and some at the teacher's own home while her husband was away. The case began after the student's mother found concerning messages on the boy's phone, prompting Formella's arrest in March of 2025. Investigators later uncovered writings where Formella accused the student of cheating on her and even mentioned plans to take her husband's money and disappear. But despite these allegations, her husband has continued to stand by her, even accompanying her to court appearances while holding her hand. Formella has pleaded not guilty to her charges and is out on bond under strict conditions. If convicted, she faces up to 60 years in prison. Isaac Hayes, the iconic soul singer who played Chef on South Park, left the show in 2006 under mysterious circumstances. A statement was released in his name, claiming he was against the show's mocking of Scientology, which he practiced. However, creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone were skeptical, noting his prior support for the show's satire of other religions. It turned out that at the time, Hayes had just suffered a debilitating stroke that impaired his ability to communicate, and his son later revealed that Isaac's fellow Scientologists spoke on his behalf while he was incapacitated. South Park responded with the episode The Return of Chef, portraying Chef as brainwashed by a cult before he's brutally killed off. The show's creators assembled Chef's lines by splicing together audio clips from previous episodes.
No, Chef, they filled your head with lies. Can't you see that?
Get the hell out of here.
Hayes tragically died in 2008 after being found unconscious next to a running treadmill, the result of another stroke. In the early 90s, Andrew Martinez became a bizarre campus icon at UC Berkeley for attending classes completely nude, claiming he was protesting what he saw as oppressive social norms. Nicknamed the Naked Guy, he was repeatedly arrested, eventually expelled, and banned from campus after the school changed its policies just to stop him. But behind the act was a deepening struggle with mental illness that was later diagnosed as schizophrenia. Over the next decade, his life unraveled into a cycle of homelessness, institutionalization, and jail time. In 2006, at just 33 years old, Martinez was found dead by suicide in a Santa Clara jail cell. In 1965, 22-year-old Lester Eubanks brutally murdered 14-year-old Mary Ellen Diener after attempting to rape her behind a house near a laundromat, shooting her twice, going home to change, then returning to bludgeon her to death with a brick upon realizing she was still alive. He was sentenced to death, but in 1972, just 3 days before his scheduled execution, Lester's sentence was commuted when Ohio temporarily suspended the death penalty. Declared a model prisoner, Eubanks was granted a bizarre privilege the next year, an unsupervised Christmas shopping trip at a mall. At some point, he walked away and simply vanished, and has been on the run ever since. In 2019, Daniela Lace left a Marilyn Manson concert in Ontario while heavily intoxicated and drove the wrong way down a residential street, crashing into a home and rupturing a gas line. 15 minutes later, the house exploded, destroying 4 homes, injuring 7 people including first responders, and causing an estimated $10 to $15 million in damage. Lace was sentenced to 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to impaired driving causing bodily harm. In a bizarre twist, she and her father later sued the concert venue's alcohol vendor, claiming they were responsible for overseeing her and allowing her to drive drunk. The Bodies exhibit, which displays real human cadavers preserved through plastination, has long been shrouded in controversy due to allegations that many of the bodies were sourced from Chinese prisons without consent. Human rights groups believe that some of the corpses may belong to executed prisoners or political dissidents, including members of persecuted groups like Falun Gong. In 2008, the exhibit's parent company was forced to admit that it couldn't verify the origins of the bodies, posting a disclaimer that some remains may have come from Chinese prisoners. Visitors may unknowingly be viewing the dissected bodies of people who died under horrific conditions. On July 14, 2017, Chester Bennington appeared in a carpool karaoke episode with comedian Ken Jeong. In the video, Chester looks joyful and full of life, laughing, cracking jokes, and singing along to Linkin Park hits as well as popular songs like Hey Ya. The footage offers a bittersweet glimpse of a man who appeared to be genuinely happy just 6 days before he tragically took his own life. In 1993, a Mexican zoo official was arrested in Miami after trying to illegally purchase a live gorilla, only to discover the animal was actually an undercover agent in a gorilla suit. The operation was part of a federal wildlife trafficking bust and led to one of the most ridiculous arrests in American history. As a child in the Philippines, boxing legend Manny Pacquiao ran away from home after witnessing a horrifying act. His father, drunk and enraged, killed and ate the family's pet dog. Devastated, Pacquiao fled and began living on the streets, sleeping in a cardboard box and surviving by selling donuts and scraps. The trauma of watching that happen to his beloved pet pushed him into a life of brutal survival at just 12 years old, an early glimpse of the hardship and violence that would define his relentless drive in the ring. When Steve Burns suddenly left Blue's Clues in 2002, dark rumors quickly began to circulate, including claims that he had vanished in a tragic accident or died from a heroin overdose. In reality, he simply felt that it was time to move on as he began balding and could no longer see himself on a children's show. The day after filming his final episode, Steve shaved his head and stepped away from the cheery world of Blue's Clues, retreating into obscurity to pursue a somber indie music career. The death hoaxes that followed weighed heavily on him, intensifying his struggles with depression and casting a long, unexpected shadow on the legacy he left behind. In 2002, reclusive hoarder Bruce Andrew Roberts shot and killed an intruder who had broken into his home. Instead of reporting the incident, Roberts hid the body in a spare bedroom, covered it with a rug, and used over 70 bottles of air freshener to mask the smell. He lived alongside the mummified corpse for 15 years until it was finally discovered during a cleanup after his death. At age 43, French journalist Jean-Dominique Bauby suffered a bad stroke and became paralyzed. He ended up being diagnosed with the nightmarish condition of locked-in syndrome, where his mind was fully intact, but he couldn't move any part of his body except for one of his eyelids. Bauby eventually blinked out a 130-page novel that was a bestseller, passing away just 2 days after it was published. In 1984, while filming Armor of God in Yugoslavia, Jackie Chan attempted what should have been a routine stunt, jumping from a wall onto a tree branch. But the branch snapped, sending him plummeting headfirst onto a pile of jagged rocks. His skull immediately cracked open, driving bone fragments deep into his brain. Emergency surgery saved his life, but not without leaving a permanent hole in his skull. Now covered by a plastic plate he can still feel to this day. Melissa Nelson worked as a dental assistant in Iowa for over 10 years before being fired, not for poor performance, but because her boss found her irresistible. He told her that if his pants ever bulged, it was her fault, and claimed that her presence alone threatened his marriage. Despite the clear sexual undertones, Melissa sued him for discrimination and lost. In a shocking 2012 decision, the all-male Iowa Supreme Court ruled that it was legal to fire someone for being too attractive, as long as it wasn't based on gender, but on personal feelings. Adult star Faye Reagan appeared in over 400 films before vanishing into obscurity following her 2014 retirement. Her life quickly spiraled into constant legal troubles, hard drug use, and homelessness. On May 7th of this year, she mysteriously disappeared from East Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas, a corridor infamous for crime and desperation. Last seen wearing green sweatpants and carrying a backpack, Reagan has not been seen or heard from since. Photographer Sam Davis captured the incredible moment a snake eel burst out from a heron's stomach while the bird was still flying, having chewed its way through the heron's throat using its pointed tail. Both animals were likely fatally injured. In the 90s, Disney planned to open a theme park called Disney's America near the Civil War battlefields in Virginia. A Disney executive said the park would let visitors feel what it was like to be a slave. Amid intense public outrage and political pressure, Disney ended up scrapping the disastrous project. Young actor Cameron Boyce tragically died in his sleep on July 6, 2019 at just 20 years old from a seizure caused by epilepsy, a condition he'd been managing with treatment. His death was officially ruled as SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, a little-known fatal complication that occurs without warning, most commonly during sleep. Cameron had reportedly experienced only about 5 seizures throughout his life, all while sleeping, and his family had never even heard of SUDEP until after his sudden death. He was found unresponsive in his North Hollywood home, and there was nothing that paramedics could do once they arrived. Cameron had spent much of his young life fighting for others, raising millions to bring clean water to Africa, supporting homeless shelters, and using his platform to speak out against gun violence. In the wake of the tragedy, his family founded the Cameron Boyce Foundation to raise awareness about epilepsy and SUDEP, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Decades of intense drumming took a brutal toll on Phil Collins's body, causing such severe nerve damage that he could no longer hold onto drumsticks. After spinal surgery in 2009, Collins lost much of the feeling in his hands and was forced to give up drumming entirely. The loss devastated him to the point where he contemplated taking his own life. In 1974, Stanford student Arliss Perry was found murdered in a campus chapel, posed kneeling at the altar with a candle stuck inside her body in what appeared to be a ritualistic killing. The case went cold for decades until in 2018, DNA linked it to a campus security guard who took his own life as police attempted to arrest him. In 2021, during a wedding ceremony in Uttar Pradesh, India, a bride named Sarabi collapsed from a heart attack and was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. But instead of canceling the expensive event, both families agreed to continue the wedding by marrying the groom to Sarabi's younger sister, Nisha. The ceremony went on while Sarabi's body was placed in another room in the house. The incident shocked many and was confirmed by local news and relatives, who watched in total disbelief as a wedding and funeral unfolded under the same roof. Ezra Miller has a long track record of disturbingly erratic and violent behavior that has deeply tarnished his public image. In 2020, Miller was caught on video choking a woman and throwing her to the ground outside of a bar in Iceland, an act the victim later confirmed was not staged. In 2022, he was arrested multiple times in Hawaii for aggressive outbursts, including lunging at patrons in a karaoke bar and throwing a chair that struck a woman in the head. That same year, Miller was accused of grooming a 12-year-old girl and using drugs, intimidation, and emotional manipulation to control her. He then hosted a woman and her children inside a home in Vermont that was allegedly filled with unattended firearms and marijuana, where one toddler reportedly nearly choked on a bullet. Reports have also surfaced of Miller claiming to be a messianic figure, identifying as both Jesus and the devil. With his career now in shambles, Miller has acknowledged his suffering from complex mental health issues. Just last week, 19-year-old Serbian model Tajana Radonjic met a horrifying end during what was supposed to be a scenic parasailing shoot off the coast of Montenegro. Suspended 150 feet in the air above the Adriatic Sea, Tajana began to scream, "Put me down," in terror. Then, in a chilling act, she unbuckled her own harness while still in the air and released herself. Onlookers watched helplessly as her body plunged into the ocean below, likely dying immediately. She had received training just minutes before and showed no obvious signs of distress, making her decision to remove the harness all the more disturbing. Many have speculated that she suffered a sudden panic attack and attempted to ground herself while being disassociated from reality. Her body was recovered from the sea hours later, and parts of the incident were caught on video. Her family has disputed the claim that she panicked or acted irrationally, raising questions about the safety of the harness or if she was given improper instructions. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BC at the age of 32, his body reportedly showed no signs of decomposition for 6 days, astonishing the ancient Greeks and fueling the belief that he was a god. But modern medical experts have proposed a much darker explanation. Alexander may have suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that causes full body paralysis while leaving the person mentally aware. If true, it means he may have been mistakenly declared dead while still conscious, and was ultimately buried alive, fully aware of what was happening but unable to move or speak. In 1969, the Black Panthers launched a free breakfast program that fed thousands of hungry kids before school in the poorest black communities. But J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI saw it as a threat to national security, apparently fearing that it would make the Black Panthers look too humane. So in response, in multiple cities, police raided kitchens at dawn, tearing apart food supplies and in some cases even urinating on the groceries, making it clear that feeding black children was more threatening than letting them starve. In 2013, Caleb McGilvery, aka Kai the hatchet-wielding hitchhiker, went viral after a wild TV interview where he described stopping an attacker with a hatchet, shouting, "Smash! Smash! Smash!" But just a few months later, he was arrested for the murder of 73-year-old lawyer Joseph Galfi in New Jersey. Galfi was found beaten to death in his own home, as Kai had reportedly punched, kicked, and stomped him until he died. Kai claimed it was self-defense after being drugged and sexually assaulted, but prosecutors said there was no evidence in his favor. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2019 and sentenced to 57 years in prison. In 2014, Jose Salvador Alvarenga was rescued after surviving 438 days lost at sea, a journey that began when his fishing boat was blown off course in Mexico. He drifted over 6,000 miles across the Pacific in a small boat, surviving by eating raw fish, turtles, and seabirds, while drinking rainwater, turtle blood, and his own pee. When he finally washed ashore in the Marshall Islands, he was sunburnt, emaciated, and clutching a knife in terror. Though his story was initially met with skepticism, experts later confirmed it was entirely plausible, setting the record for the longest solo survival at sea by far. What producers got away with on Fear Factor was nothing short of insane. Contestants were fed blended rats, pig rectums, maggots, and even drank donkey semen and urine in a notorious episode so vile that NBC refused to air it. Injuries were common, with some participants hospitalized for stunts that went wrong, one nearly dying from hypothermia after being submerged in ice water, while others were left with concussions, whiplash, and long-term psychological trauma. Host Joe Rogan later admitted the show became absolutely insane, as producers escalated the torture for ratings, ignoring the visible misery of their contestants. Animal rights groups slammed the show for cruelty, as live insects were eaten, snakes were abused, and rats were used in disturbing stunts, all for cheap thrills. Despite its grotesque popularity, Fear Factor was finally canceled twice, with the second cancellation triggered by the infamous Semen Challenge, which many people saw as the moment reality TV officially lost its soul. In 2012, a freak accident saved this woman's life in the craziest way possible. 42-year-old Donna Barber was at a family gathering in Arkansas when her teenage son accidentally shot her straight in the neck with a bow and arrow. The arrow pierced the side of her throat just inches from her carotid artery, close enough that she could feel her pulse pounding against the shaft. For a moment, Dawn remained standing in shock before collapsing in a pool of her own blood. As her family screamed in panic, some believing they just witnessed her death, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But during emergency scans, doctors made a chilling discovery. Nestled deep in her neck, not far from the arrow's path, was a cancerous tumor growing in her thyroid. It hadn't caused any symptoms yet, and without the arrow, it likely would have gone unnoticed until it was far too late. Surgeons carefully removed the arrow, then the tumor in a single surgery, and Dawn miraculously went on to make a full recovery. Celine Dion lost both her husband and brother to cancer within the same week in 2016. She performed shortly after their deaths, later saying the stage was the only place she didn't feel pain. In 2021, a 45-year-old man named Thangula Satish died in India after his rooster, armed with a 3-inch blade for an illegal cockfight, slashed his groin as it tried to escape, severing a major artery and causing him to bleed out before he reached the hospital. The rooster was briefly detained at a police station before being transferred to a local farm. In 1974, the mutilated body of a woman was found neatly placed on a beach blanket in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. Her hands were missing, her teeth removed, and her skull was crushed on one side, yet her hair was styled and her toenails painted. Known for decades only as the Lady of the Dunes, her identity remained a mystery despite widespread speculation. Over the years, she was linked to escaped convicts, mob enforcers, and even a missing extra from the film set of Jaws. Finally, in 2022, nearly 50 years later, forensic genealogy identified her as 37-year-old Ruth Marie Terry from Tennessee, and her husband, a con man with a dark past, was named the likely killer. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his rib cage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. Morbid Facts, Part 671. In 2014, comedian Tracy Morgan was critically injured in a car crash on the New Jersey Turnpike when a Walmart tractor-trailer suddenly slammed into his limo van. The collision killed his close friend and fellow comedian James McNair and left Morgan with a broken femur, broken ribs, broken nose, and a traumatic brain injury. Doctors initially feared he might not survive, and he remained in a coma for over a week. The truck driver had reportedly been awake for more than 24 hours, prompting Morgan to sue Walmart for negligence. The company ultimately settled the lawsuit outside of court, and Tracy has publicly forgiven the driver. In 1980, a man named John Burgess, who had lost over $750,000 while gambling, attempted to extort money from Harvey's Resort Hotel in Nevada by planting one of the most sophisticated homemade bombs the FBI had ever seen. Disguised as a copy machine and weighing over 1,000 pounds, the device was placed on the second floor of the casino along with a ransom note demanding $3 million. The FBI evacuated the building and spent hours trying to disarm the bomb, but when they attempted to disable it using a controlled charge, the entire device detonated. The explosion damaged much of the building and caused over $18 million in damage, but miraculously no one was killed. Burgess was later arrested, convicted, and died while in prison. In 2020, Canadian actor Ryan Grantham, known for his roles in Riverdale and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, shot and killed his 64-year-old mother while she was playing piano in their home, then filmed the aftermath on a GoPro. Grantham then packed his car with guns, ammunition, Molotov cocktails, and a map to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's residence, allegedly planning to assassinate him. But instead, he drove to a police station and turned himself in. During the trial, it was revealed that Grantham was suffering from severe depression and suicidal thoughts. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole in 14 years. In 1988, expert skydiver Ivan McGuire boarded a plane in North Carolina to film a routine jump from 10,000 feet. With over 800 jumps under his belt, he was calm, confident, and fully focused on capturing the perfect footage. His helmet camera recorded everything: his smooth exit from the plane, the free fall, and the other jumpers floating below. But partway through the descent, McGuire began frantically patting his back, expressing confusion that quickly turned to panic. Just seconds before impact, his voice can be heard yelling, "Oh my God, no!" He was apparently so focused on filming that he had jumped without a parachute. In 2015, YouTube prankster Sam Pepper lured Sam Golback into a staged nightmare, faking his kidnapping with Colby Brock in on the plan. Sam was tied to a chair with a hood over his head, then forced to watch as a masked abductor held his best friend Colby at gunpoint before appearing to execute him at point-blank range. Sam's screams and sobs were genuine. He believed he'd just witnessed the murder of his best friend. But just moments later, Colby revealed it was all just an elaborate prank. The video drew massive backlash for its cruelty and for mimicking real-life execution videos, with critics calling it one of the most disturbing stunts in YouTube history. In the 1820s, Surgeon William Beaumont made history by experimenting on a man whose gunshot wound left a permanent hole in his stomach. He tied bits of food to strings, lowered them inside, and then pulled them out to watch them dissolve, sometimes peering directly into the man's gut or draining stomach acid to test it on food outside of his body. These grotesque experiments became the first to prove that digestion was a chemical process driven by gastric juices, making Beaumont both a pioneer of physiology and one of the more unsettling figures in medical history.